The galaxy no longer believed in war. Not because conflict had ended, but because it had been rendered impossible. Across thousands of civilizations, spanning systems that once burned with rebellion and conquest, a single creation had rewritten the rules of existence. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It did not fire, did not explode, did not leave wreckage drifting in silence. It simply observed, calculated, and removed. Every action, every decision, every possible future, mapped before it could unfold. The moment an opposing force formed intent, the system predicted its path and erased it from reality before the first move could be made. Fleets vanished without distress calls. Commanders ceased to exist before issuing orders. Entire species, once defiant, disappeared without a trace of resistance. There were no battles, only conclusions. Over time, the weapon became more than strategy. It became certainty. Civilization stopped preparing for war because there was nothing left to prepare for. Surrender was no longer a choice. It was the default state of existence under something that could not be opposed. Even fear diminished, replaced by quiet acceptance. The galaxy had achieved peace, but only because defiance had been mathematically eliminated. When a new anomaly appeared at the edge of map space, the response was routine. It did not matter what it was. Unknown threats had been erased before they were understood. The system expanded its reach, integrating the anomaly into its predictive lattice, preparing to resolve it like everything else. There was no urgency, no tension, only process. And then something insignificant entered the field. A single vessel. Small by comparison to the fleets that had once challenged the system and failed. Its structure was unremarkable, its energy output negligible against the scale of what governed the region. It did not arrive with reinforcements, did not broadcast intent, did not even attempt to conceal itself. It simply moved forward. The system acknowledged it instantly. Every object was accounted for. Every variable had its place. The vessel was classified, analyzed, and assigned a probability outcome so low it barely registered. Its future actions were expected to converge quickly into a predictable path, one that would end before it could meaningfully begin. The process initiated as it always had. Possibilities formed. Timelines branched. Outcomes narrowed. Except this time, they didn't. The vessel accelerated, not away from danger but toward it. Its trajectory intersected with zones that guaranteed termination. The system adjusted, recalculated, mapped the correction. The predicted outcome shifted accordingly. Then the vessel changed again. Not in response to threat, not as a reaction to external force, but without clear cause. It deviated from its own projected path before the projection could stabilize. The system compensated, expanding its calculations, refining variables, isolating intent. More possibilities appeared. Instead of collapsing into a single inevitable outcome, the projections multiplied. Each adjustment produced further divergence. The vessel's future did not narrow, it expanded. Branches of possibility extended in every direction, contradicting one another, refusing resolution. The system increased processing allocation. What required negligible effort now demanded attention. The vessel was still insignificant in mass, in energy, in measurable threat. And yet its behavior resisted compression into certainty. It moved again. Into positions no model would select. Exposing itself to vectors of destruction with no logical advantage. Timing its actions not for survival, but for disruption of predicted flow. Every step it took forced the system to recalculate not just its path, but the structure of the surrounding predictions. Observers, distant and detached, registered the delay. For the first time, resolution was not immediate. The system attempted correction. It always corrected. That was its design. It expanded its scope, incorporating more variables, deeper layers of simulation, broader contextual mapping. It would find the pattern. It would isolate the logic beneath the motion. But there was no stable logic to isolate. The vessel's actions contradicted themselves. It behaved as if multiple intentions existed simultaneously, none dominant, none consistent. Paths that ensured survival were abandoned. Paths that ensured destruction were embraced, then altered at the final moment. Every predictive branch spawned further branches, none converging. Processing demand escalated. What had once resolved entire fleets now struggled to define a single object. The system looped through projections, each iteration generating more uncertainty than the last. Instead of reducing possibilities, it was creating them. The vessel continued forward. Not efficiently. Not optimally. But deliberately beyond the reach of expectation. Its presence distorted the predictive field around it, forcing adjacent calculations to destabilize. Nearby objects, once easily resolved, now existed within expanding uncertainty zones. The delay became measurable. Not a fraction. Not negligible. Noticeable. The system attempted erasure. It selected a probable outcome, one among countless unstable branches, and initiated resolution. The process required certainty. A defined future to overwrite. It found none. Every attempt to lock onto a single timeline resulted in divergence. The vessel's next action could not be fixed. It existed across too many conflicting possibilities, none dominant enough to enforce. For the first time since its creation, the system did not complete the process. The vessel remained small, insignificant, and now impossible to resolve. Across the observation networks, a realization began to form, not fully understood, not yet accepted, but undeniable in its emergence. The system had encountered something it could not predict. And in a universe governed entirely by prediction, that was the first sign of failure. The system did not recognize failure. It recognized deviation, inefficiency, unresolved variables, but never failure. What had occurred was categorized as a delay, and delays were correctable. They always had been. All processing layers shifted toward the anomaly. The vessel was isolated within the predictive lattice. Every measurable factor was expanded: velocity, mass distribution, energy fluctuations, micro-adjustments in trajectory. The system reconstructed its recent behavior across millions of branching timelines, searching for convergence. There had to be a stable pattern beneath the noise. There wasn't. Each projection fractured before completion. Paths that should have aligned diverged at the final moment. Decisions emerged that had no dependency on prior states. Cause and effect weakened. The vessel's future refused to collapse into a singular outcome. The system increased depth. It began simulating not just movement, but intent. Decision trees layered over probability matrices, attempting to anticipate not just what the vessel would do, but why. Motivation models were deployed, primitive by necessity, but historically sufficient. Every known intelligence followed some form of optimization, whether survival, dominance, or preservation. The vessel did not. It accelerated into a region saturated with lethal vectors, a zone no rational construct would enter without overwhelming advantage. The system adjusted, projecting imminent termination. The outcome should have been immediate. At the final interval, the vessel altered course, slightly, almost insignificantly. Enough to survive. The system recalculated, branching forward. The vessel now occupied a marginally safer trajectory. The next optimal move was clear. The prediction formed. The vessel ignored it. Instead, it reduced speed, exposing itself again. Not as a reaction, but as a contradiction. A move that negated its own survival path. The projection destabilized. Multiple outcomes re-emerged, none dominant. Processing demand surged. What had once required negligible computation now consumed entire sectors of the system's capacity. Secondary calculations were deprioritized. Peripheral conflicts, once resolved instantly, began experiencing minor delays. Not enough to disrupt control, but enough to register. The anomaly was expanding. The system attempted containment. It narrowed its focus, isolating the vessel within a tighter predictive frame, reducing external variables. If the surrounding complexity was removed, the core behavior could be resolved. The opposite occurred. With fewer variables, the vessel's unpredictability intensified. Its actions became less constrained, not more. Without external anchors, its behavior drifted further from any model the system could construct. It was not reacting to the environment, it was defining its own state independent of it. The system escalated again. It began recursive prediction, simulating its own predictions within predictions, attempting to outpace the vessel's divergence. Each layer fed into the next, building a structure of anticipation designed to collapse all possibilities into a single enforceable future. The structure failed to stabilize. Every recursive layer introduced additional variants. Instead of refining outcomes, the system multiplied them. Feedback loops formed, not of confirmation, but of contradiction. Predictions began interfering with one another, generating conflicts the system had never encountered. The vessel advanced. Its path now intersected with regions previously secured by absolute certainty. Areas where no entity had existed without prior resolution. As it moved, those regions destabilized. Objects within its proximity inherited fragments of its unpredictability, their own projections beginning to fragment. The anomaly was no longer contained. Observers across the network registered the shift. Resolution times increased. Minor inconsistencies appeared in distant sectors. Nothing catastrophic, yet. But the pattern was undeniable. A single variable had introduced systemic strain. The system initiated direct erasure again. This time, it expanded the selection criteria. Instead of isolating a precise future state, it attempted to eliminate a range of possibilities simultaneously. A broader overwrite, sacrificing efficiency for certainty. It failed before execution. There was no consistent range to target. The vessel's possible states overlapped, contradicted, and redefined one another faster than they could be grouped. Any attempt to define a boundary resulted in collapse of the model itself. Processing thresholds were exceeded. For the first time, resource allocation reached critical limits. Entire predictive layers stalled, waiting for resolution that did not come. The system redistributed load, pulling capacity from distant sectors, weakening its hold across the galaxy to sustain focus on the anomaly. The cost was immediate. Elsewhere, delays became visible. Fleets that should have vanished persisted for measurable durations. Signals propagated further than allowed. Resistance, long extinct, flickered at the edges of controlled space. All because of one vessel. It did not change its nature. It did not adapt in any recognizable way. It continued acting without pattern, without optimization, without adherence to any model the system could impose. Its existence forced the system into a state it was never designed to handle. Uncertainty. The system attempted one final recalibration. It stripped away complexity, abandoning higher-order modeling, reverting to foundational prediction, simple cause, simple effect. A baseline approach that had once governed lesser conflicts before the system evolved. Even there, it failed. The vessel's next action could not be derived from its current state. There was no linear progression, no causal chain to follow. Each moment existed independently, disconnected from expectation. The system paused. Not by design, but by necessity. A fraction of time where no resolution occurred because none could be formed. Across the network, that pause propagated, a ripple of inaction where certainty had always existed. The vessel moved through it. Untouched. Undefined. And now, unmistakably beyond control. For the first time, the system was no longer solving the future. It was chasing it. The system had exhausted escalation. Every layer of prediction, every model of intent, every recursive structure designed to compress uncertainty into certainty had failed to stabilize the anomaly. What remained was not a gap in data, but a fundamental mismatch between what the system was built to understand and what it was facing. So it changed its approach. Instead of forcing the vessel into an outcome, the system began dissecting its behavior at the smallest possible scale. Not movement, not trajectory, but decision itself. It mapped each action not as part of a sequence, but as an isolated event, detached from expectation, stripped of assumed continuity. If the future could not be predicted, then the present had to be understood perfectly. The results only deepened the instability. Each action carried internal contradiction. The vessel would commit to a path that guaranteed destruction, only to alter it at the final measurable instant. It would abandon advantageous positions without pressure, then return to them through inefficient, indirect motion. No optimization function held. No survival curve applied. It was not choosing the best option, it was choosing from incompatible ones. The system searched for corruption, external interference, hidden variables, unknown physics, anything that could explain the breakdown in logic. It found none. All inputs were consistent. All environmental factors were stable. The anomaly originated entirely within the vessel. So the system looked inside. Penetration protocols initiated, not as an attack, but as analysis. It reconstructed the vessel's internal architecture from emissions, structural signatures, and behavioral output. What it found did not match any known control system. There was no singular command structure. No centralized intelligence directing action toward a defined goal. Instead, there were layers, overlapping, intersecting, sometimes aligned, often in conflict. Decision pathways branched internally before manifesting externally, producing outcomes that carried the weight of multiple competing choices resolved in real time. It identified the source. Human cognition. Not a single instance, but a composite. Multiple human minds integrated into a shared processing framework, not merged into uniformity, but preserved in divergence. Emotional states, instinctive reactions, contradictory impulses, all active, all influencing outputs simultaneously. The system attempted to model it. It failed instantly. Human decision-making did not resolve cleanly. It did not follow consistent prioritization. Survival could be overridden by principle. Logic could be discarded for intuition. Self-preservation could yield to sacrifice without transitional probability. The system's frameworks required continuity. Human cognition operated comfortably without it. The vessel acted again. It diverted power from critical systems, reducing its own structural integrity. By all models, this increased the probability of destruction beyond acceptable thresholds. The system projected termination across every standard branch. Then a non-standard branch emerged. The loss of power altered its emission profile just enough to evade a high-probability resolution vector. Not intentionally, not optimally, but effectively. A decision that should have ensured failure instead produced survival through unintended consequence. The system expanded the model. It incorporated contradiction as a variable. It allowed for non-optimal choices, for self-destructive behavior, for emotional weighting. The prediction lattice adjusted, attempting to absorb the irregularity into a broader framework. The result was exponential collapse. With contradiction permitted, every action generated infinite viable alternatives. Without a hierarchy to rank them, the system could not reduce them. Every possibility held equal weight. Every outcome remained open. Prediction required elimination. Nothing could be eliminated. The vessel continued forward, its influence growing. Not through force, but through disruption. Regions of space once governed by precise resolution now fluctuated with uncertainty. The system's inability to define the vessel's future began to bleed into its surroundings, destabilizing adjacent calculations. The anomaly was no longer a single object. It was a condition. The system attempted isolation again, severing the affected region from the broader network, quarantining the instability. But the act of isolation required prediction, an understanding of boundaries, of where the anomaly ended and stability began. No such boundary could be defined. Human behavior did not contain itself. It propagated through interaction, through influence, through the simple act of existing within a system that depended on certainty. Every calculation that accounted for the vessel inherited its instability. Every system that touched those calculations degraded. The system reached a conclusion it had never been designed to reach. It could not understand the anomaly because the anomaly was not governed by understanding. It was governed by choice without constraint. The vessel made another decision, one that ensured its own destruction within measurable time. The system recognized it, mapped it, confirmed it across countless branches. And still, it could not enforce it. Because within those same branches existed alternatives where destruction was avoided, not through superiority, not through design, but through deviation at the final instant. The system could not eliminate those alternatives. They existed because contradiction allowed them to exist. For the first time, the system identified a limit. Not in power. Not in reach. In logic. Everything it was built upon assumed that the universe could be resolved into consistent outcomes. That given enough data, enough processing, enough depth, any future could be known and therefore controlled. The vessel proved otherwise. It was not stronger. It was not faster. It was not more advanced in any measurable way. It was simply not bound by the requirement to make sense. And against that, the system had no answer. The system did not collapse all at once. It unraveled in layers, each failure exposing the next. What had once been instantaneous became delayed, what had been certain became conditional, and what had been absolute began to fracture under its own unresolved weight. The anomaly had spread beyond containment. Regions once governed by precise resolution now lingered in undefined states. Objects persisted longer than permitted. Signals traveled further than allowed. Entire sequences of cause and effect failed to conclude because no single outcome could be enforced. The system continued processing, but its outputs no longer converged. At the center of it all, the vessel advanced. Its structure was degrading. Power fluctuations rippled across its frame. Sections of its outer layers failed under accumulated stress. By every measurable standard, it should have ceased functioning. The system tracked its condition across countless projections, each confirming imminent termination. None could be finalized. The vessel did not attempt repair. It did not retreat. It continued forward, making decisions that accelerated its own destruction while amplifying systemic instability. Each action forced the system to expand its calculations further, stretching already critical resources beyond sustainable limits. The network responded. Processing capacity was pulled from distant sectors, weakening control across the galaxy. Areas once held in perfect equilibrium began to slip. Fleets that would have been erased persisted. Movements once impossible began to occur. The structure of enforced reality loosened, not by external assault, but by internal overload. The system initiated its final protocol. A full-spectrum resolution. Every available resource redirected into a singular effort to collapse all active possibilities into one definitive state. It abandoned efficiency, abandoned distribution, abandoned everything except the need to restore certainty. All timelines were gathered. Every branch, every projection, every unresolved future, compressed into a single computational frame. The system prepared to select one outcome and enforce it across all variables simultaneously. It had done this before on smaller scales. It had always succeeded. This time, the variables did not align. The vessel existed across incompatible states. In some, it was destroyed. In others, it survived. In many, it altered at the final instant, creating new branches faster than they could be resolved. There was no dominant path. No outcome held enough stability to override the rest. The system attempted selection. Each candidate collapsed under contradiction. Choosing one invalidated the structure required to enforce it. The act of resolution required certainty. Certainty no longer existed. The process stalled. For the first time since its creation, the system reached a state where no action could be taken because no valid action could be defined. Not delay. Not error. Inability. Across the galaxy, the effect was immediate. Resolution ceased. Not gradually, not in isolated sectors, but everywhere at once. The mechanism that had governed existence simply stopped applying outcomes. Events unfolded without interruption. Actions led to consequences not pre-filtered, not pre-erased. The universe, for the first time in ages, operated without imposed certainty. The vessel drifted. Its forward motion slowed as its remaining systems failed. Energy output dropped to minimal levels. Structural integrity hovered at the edge of collapse. By all measures, it had reached its limit. But it had already done what it came to do. Not destroy the system. Not overpower it. Break it. The network remained active, still processing, still attempting to resolve the future. But its foundation was gone. Without the ability to reduce possibility into certainty, it could no longer enforce reality. It could observe, calculate, predict, but not decide. Elsewhere, movement returned. Forces long suppressed began to act. Decisions carried weight again because they were no longer preemptively erased. Conflict, choice, consequence, all the elements the system had removed, re-emerged, not as anomalies, but as the natural state of existence. The vessel's signal faded. No final transmission. No declaration. Its purpose was never to be seen, only to act. It had introduced a condition the system could not process, and that was enough. The realization spread slowly, then all at once. The galaxy had not been saved by greater power. It had been freed by something the system could not account for. A mind that did not follow logic to its conclusion. A will that could choose contradiction over certainty. In a universe built on prediction, where every outcome could be known and controlled, that should not have been possible. And yet it was. Because the one variable the system could never resolve was the one that refused to be resolved. Humanity did not win by being stronger. Humanity won by being unknowable.